Hey guys, Chaps here, and it's time for another developer stream recap. It's been a while since we've had a PvE stream, but Michael Shannon was on today, so quite a few questions got answered. This is going to be another long one, so I'll keep my color commentary to a minimum. Now let's sit back, relax, and enjoy the recap.
How has it been going from your perspective? We talked a lot about ranked and we've done all that, so how's it going from your perspective?
Yeah, we've been pretty happy with the response. I was really worried a little bit about, because we made a lot of changes to a lot of characters, and we were really worried that we maybe didn't buff any characters enough, or made the wrong changes. And it seems like for the most part the tuning for the characters is in a pretty good place now. It's not perfect, there's still some things we want to address, but our main goal really was the fun factor for Op4, and we've definitely seen a lot of positive feedback around Horde being just, in general, more pleasant to play. And for me, that's awesome to hear. That's kind of my main thing. Is I just want PvE to just be fun, and just a great chill, fun experience. And I'm really happy that at least we're able to get a little closer with Op4. So.
Cool. Do you want to talk a little bit about what was the inspiration for Paddock? What's a good play style for him? Just for people that maybe haven't had a chance to play with him a whole bunch.
Yeah, so for Paddock, what we had really we'd identified that there was a weakness in the lineup where there was no character that could really sort of bail you out of a really bad situation. For example, if your Horde base is kind of getting overrun by Pouncers and Guardians and stuff like that, there wasn't really a character that could just sort of buy you a little bit of time, right? So that's sort of how we came up with the idea for Fear.
We've got, 18, 19 classes now. Are you going to add more?
So, yeah, we're going to be adding classes when we find, similar to what we did with Paddock, where we sort of identified something that was missing in the lineup, a mechanic that we want, or a weakness that's not available in the current cast of characters or skill cards. So when we identify those, we will add them. But we also want to make sure that we're not adding tons and tons of solutions, but not problems, if that makes sense, right? So we do also need to make sure that we're adding new challenges for players and new ways to use those classes, skills, and stuff like that, and not just adding more solutions to the same problems. We want to also see if we can add more problems for players to solve, whether that be new bosses or enemies or maps, stuff like that, right?
Wait, did he just say adding new bosses and enemies? Oh man, what do you think we're gonna see? Obviously, I'd love to see some classic bosses and enemies from previous games, but TC likes to surprise us. Do you think there's a different direction that they could be going with this?
So right now, the amount of time it takes to get characters cards viable for Masters feels really long. Are you guys going to do anything to alleviate the amount of grinding it takes to make a class viable?
So yeah, that's something that we're looking at. I will just preface this with a lot of the progression stuff is more of Andy's area, but I can chat about it a little bit. We are looking at ways to make the game more rewarding to play for playing certain types of content. So sort of what I'm looking to do there is, right now, if you're sort of a min-maxer and you really want to just get your characters up to the absolute max level and you want to sort of progress very quickly, you sort of have to play certain things. It's heavily encouraged to play, speed runs on the clock or Surge, or play Forge or other maps that are really easy to beat, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. The players that are doing that, all the power to them. That's awesome. But I'm really interested in finding ways to give accelerated progression for players that opt in to play more challenging content, or in some cases curated content, whether that be maybe some new mutators for Horde or something like that. So I'll leave it at that. We have some cool stuff coming, and I hope we can sort of give people more tools to accelerate their progress, but also do it in a way where people are having a lot of fun.
Yeah. But do you want to talk a little bit about what that, what the plans are with scrapping duplicate cards?
Yeah, so we're definitely looking to do that. So we definitely want to make sure that players aren't earning unusable duplicates, which is the case right now. Players are sort of amassing duplicates that they can't use, and that's a huge problem in the game, and we want to resolve it. I can't give an exact like time frame of when we will resolve it, but we're looking at it very seriously, and we want to resolve it. Because it's so early, I can't really get into details around like conversion rates or anything like that, but we want to make sure that it feels fair. So we will make sure that you're feeling rewarded for those duplicates, and that it doesn't feel like sort of, because if it wasn't a good rate, then it would kind of feel similar, right? Where you're just sort of earning something that's not really worth anything to you as a player. So we want to make sure that feels good.
Yeah. This is a tile-based map. So this is the third week in a row, I believe we've done them. Or this is our third one, correct?
Yeah, this is the third one. So we had
this
Overload, Abyss, and then Rail Line.
And this is the last one for this operation?
Yeah, this is the last one for this operation.
Do we expect to see more in the future?
Yeah, so like we've been kind of monitoring the response. So I think we probably will make some more, because the response has been pretty good. So and we have a lot of fun making them, right? So we'll see what we can do.
Oh, I should say the Paddock medal, the Running Scared, that will be fixed in. There's a title update coming on Tuesday. I like Escape. I hate having to watch the same thing over and over and at the beginning again. Is there anything we can do for that?
So specifically the intro, or are we kind of talking more about sort of the Iron Man problem where...
No, well, both. I mean, the Iron Man problem obviously exacerbates it, but the intro's a little just kind of...
Yeah, like we can chat about the intro. It is pretty long, and I'm sure veteran Escape players have probably had enough of it. For me, the problem that I'm really interested in solving is the Iron Man problem. So we did some investigation on this. It's a little more complicated to fix than we intended. So what I'm going to be trying to see if we can get pretty soon is just replacing the mutator on all the hives. So we can just get that out of there and just replace it with something that adds a similar amount of difficulty, and sort of just remove that from the game, because we know it's a pretty bad experience.
Are you going to make any changes to passives, or is there anything coming with that? Are you looking at that kind of stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, so for sure, 100%. So when the game sort of came out, a lot of the passives were more about getting your, like, different ways to get your ultimate faster. So we had like mark targets, like kill your marked target to get your ultimate faster, take damage to get your ultimate faster. But for me, a really good passive is something that sort of reinforces the core gameplay of the class, right? So for example, with Paddock, like I do double damage on fear enemies. So this is a way that sort of reinforces my core gameplay loop on Paddock, which is really cool, right? So I really want to bring passives that are like that to all the classes. So we did a little bit of that in Operation 4. So we had some changes to like Marcus and some other classes where we changed the passive up. We're gonna go through and make sure that every class has a really awesome passive that really reinforces their core gameplay. One of the ones that we're playing with internally right now for Kate is, and no guarantee this is gonna make it in the game, but right now we have it so she does 10 times damage when she shoots coming out of cloak. So what that means is you can go into cloak, go up behind like a scion or something and shoot them, and you're doing 10 times damage. So it's sort of like a sneak attack mechanic, right? Yeah. So that's something we're playing with. So that should give you sort of an idea of the kinds of things that we're playing with, like, you know, like passives that really reinforce that core gameplay of the class and the spirit of the class, right? So.
Oh, can we have more Horde events like the Terminator one? That one was the shit.
Yeah. So for sure. So we're looking at bringing in more events. I'm really interested in events like the Terminator one, where we sort of bring like new enemies, and even if it's just a skin swap, it's still really cool. Like it's awesome to see like something new and fight something new in the game. So I'm really interested in that. We have some events coming in Op 4, and then in the future, sort of like in the Op 5 and beyond time frame, we're going to be doing some events that do introduce some new enemy types into the game. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And there it is again, new enemy types. Really looking forward to that.
No spoilers, but are there new bosses that you're thinking about or toying with and working on?
Yeah, so obviously I can't get into like explicit detail about like what we're doing, how many, and when, but people can expect to have at least one new boss in the game.
Or no, why haven't we had it where you can play against, like, you can be the monsters instead of the humans and all of that.
But fighting monsters at the same time, or specifically
or fighting cogs. Like, they want to flip it.
Right. Yeah, like, it's a really cool idea. Like, obviously, you know, there were modes for that in Gears of War 3 and Judgment, and they were, like, especially Overrun was very well loved. Obviously, that was both sides. You had Cog and and Locust, but yeah, like, it's a really cool idea. Obviously, I can't like, you know, get into detail around stuff we may or may not be doing, but it's a little difficult, right? Because we have such vast armies, right, for the Swarm already sort of established, and like, today, if we flipped it, like, you know, you wouldn't really have a lot on the cog side really to work with that would kind of bring compelling challenges to the player. But I think it's a really cool idea to explore.
And then the other question we get a lot is, what about bringing back some of those iconic Locust characters from previous games?
Right. Yeah. Like who knows? Like, one of the things I'm really interested in filling in the Horde lineup right now is a drone that kind of carries some of the weapons we're missing. So we're missing a few weapons. So we don't have a Retro Lancer drone. We don't have a Bolt Hawk drone. We don't have a Lancer drone. Who knows? Maybe there's an opportunity there to kind of fill some of those roles with some iconic Locust characters.
For the bleeding barrier glitch, we're going to get very specific here. Have you considered that players actually enjoyed this aspect and thought about just making an engineer class that does status effects to barriers, like adding these cards to make Del viable?
Right, yeah, that's very interesting. We have looked at the various sort of exploits and stuff that have popped up and looked to them sort of as inspiration where to take tuning. So, for example, when we had sort of the broken Uncle Clay and Sisters to the End card, where, you know, players were getting their ultimate really, really fast with this card, and they really liked that, right? That was really fun to get your ultimate and use the silverback a lot and kind of, you know, keep shooting like Clayton's ultimate over and over again. And that was sort of inspiration for upping the ultimate recharge rate across the board, really. So that was sort of the inspiration for that. When it comes to bleeding barriers, you know, fortifications are already extremely strong. For me, we are looking at ways to make engineers more effective at what they do, especially now with Operation 4. You know, the Fabricator's open, and there are a lot of concerns around the effectiveness of engineers, and we are looking at it very closely and playing around with some things internally. But the concern there is you never want the game to be on autopilot, right? So the reason why we had to fix these bleeding barrier exploits is because we don't want anything in the game that, you know, is anti-game, if that makes sense. Like, you want the players to be engaging, and you want them to be, you know, actually doing the combat. You don't want sort of the ability to have a setup that doesn't require inputs in combat. So that's why we didn't really like the idea of keeping those in the game. That's not to say that we couldn't make, you know, skill cards that give you things like that for doing skillful things. As a matter of fact, like, we are looking at ways to make more skill cards that give you damage boosts for doing skillful things, sort of like Paddock's consecutive shot and stuff like that. So maybe there's an opportunity there to do something, but we definitely want to be careful not to kind of, you know, open up any autopilot strategies.
Which, do you want to maybe just give the 2-second version on kind of what is that separating characters versus classes? What does that mean? Yeah,
sure. So obviously we don't want to go into too explicit detail about what we're doing, but the basics really is that it's kind of exactly that, right? We're simply allowing you to play any of the classes in the game with any of the cog characters in the game. So I believe in the question, the example was like, can I play 3 Doms with 2 Bairds? Like
yeah.
From a character point of view, absolutely. And we are looking to also remove the restriction on the number of classes that you can have in the game. So in that situation, you would basically have total freedom to have as many characters or classes that you. Sorry, getting kind of overrun here. To basically have any composition you want and play any character that you want, right?
one of the other questions that we got in there was around publishing health cost, damage, range, speed, enemies, fortifications, that kind of stuff. And there's two reasons for that, right? One, that's a lot of information that's in a variety of sources, and it would be a ton of work to put it all into one. And the other thing is, it will be out of date because you're always refining and making meta changes,
right.
and that we don't hide. But it's just one of those that becomes a little bit tricky. We don't want information out there that's going to necessarily be inaccurate all the time.
Yeah, it's a pretty huge effort to really get all that information and kind of publish it, and keeping it up to date is kind of the concern there, because we do make tuning changes, and we need to be able to be flexible to make those changes, and keeping sort of an encyclopedia of our tuning values would be very difficult to keep up to date. It's a really cool idea. There's definitely value in doing it, but I would kind of categorize that as lower priority at the moment. Yeah. The meta will change because we will be able to bring in multiple of the same class, which we have been making some changes to account for that. Now that doesn't necessarily mean making classes less powerful, but we have been looking at sort of what the ramifications are of allowing multiple of the same class, and accounting for those to make sure that it's a smooth transition, and that we've sort of accounted for some of the things there, because there are some things that sort of go wrong when you bring multiple of the same class into the game. So making sure that all that was sort of accounted for was important for us.
And then what about cards like Uncle Clay? So obviously that's a very specific card referring to Clayton. Is that how is that going to work?
Yeah, so there's a number of cards in the game, and other things too, that specifically reference that are references to characters, or references to things that are about a character, and we'll simply just be making that language generic. So whatever the class name ends up being for the Clayton and the Lizzie class, you would expect that the text on the card would just simply say those names instead of the character names. So that's actually quite a simple change.
Can the level 6 cards be looked at? The buff jump from level 5 to 6 isn't very big, which is interesting. You talked a lot about how you actually really adjust, that was a conscious effort in Op 4 with part of the tuning update, was to really give that more of a bigger, rather than a sort of a slow gradual one. There is a more dramatic ramp up into level 6.
Right.
Is that something you're feeling a lot, or is that something that is that a consistent piece of feedback?
Yeah, so just to address that really quick, when we chatted about sort of, having a significant difference between 5 and 6, that didn't necessarily mean that we would be making the level 6 version just like a crazy huge jump compared to, say, 4 and 5. What that really meant was we had some cards that had a really, really strict ramp, where the returns you were getting for each level was going down and down and down as the card would level up. And the difference between 4 and 5 was so little that if we sort of kept the progression consistent, this level 6 version would have been just not super great. So what the intention there was is we went back to cards that were doing that, and we sort of straightened the ramp of the progression so that the level 6 version was a bump that wasn't diminished to the point where it wouldn't be worth grinding for. So, now, that isn't to say that if there are certain cards that are underpowered, we can look at tuning those, but overall, we didn't want to just sort of take every card in the game and just say, okay, let's just make this crazy good, because that would be a really huge challenge when it comes to keeping the game balanced, right? So that's sort of the way we went with that.
The cards being removed when starting a match sometimes.
Yeah, so that's a known.
What's the progress? That's a known issue,
yeah,
correct?
Yeah, we're working on that.
One of the things that we're going to be rolling out, hopefully next week, is we have a Trello board that, to address a lot of these sort of like the running scared is a perfect example of issues that are known that we get asked a lot about. We're going to put those out and let people know so they know the issues that we're aware of, what we're working on, and ETA on fixes when we have those ETAs there, and then issues that are resolved. So stay tuned for that. We'll be announcing that when it's live. Like I said, we're aiming for next Tuesday, but we're just trying to lock down a few more of the details around making sure that it's as fleshed out as possible. So there we go.
And just really quickly to add to that, there is a frequent question. The Grace bleeding card not working is a known issue, so we do know about that. And we do also know about the Lizzie's cold finish and aggressive armor not working with melee and grenades.
So, yes. So those will be things that you'll see ones like that. Like we're going to try to keep the Trello board to high level only, and it's not going to be every issue that we're aware of, but the main ones that we're thinking about and that we will address as it makes sense. So just because you don't see it on there doesn't mean it's. There will be things that we're working on that are not necessarily on our board. When are we going to start seeing some of these Horde events?
Yeah, so we'll start seeing some of them in Operation 4. I guess like the more sophisticated ones will be coming Operation 5 and beyond.
Yeah. Okay. And then I see on This Week in Gears we do call them Horde events, but they are in terms of like it's a new map or what have you. So I guess technically it's not an event. It is a focused on a feature map. So in terms of what we've been doing with the tile ones, but more will be coming from down that path. Can we get a weapon damage indicator like Horde does in Escape?
Oh, weapon damage. Oh, is that about the damage number not appearing in the top right of the screen in Escape?
I'm not sure. Let's see what they provide more context on that.
If so, it's just a bug. It's just a bug, and we can look at that.
What about, are you going to add all the pistols to the Fabricator?
Oh, that's actually really good. Okay, so I wanted to chat about that. So a lot of people were kind of scratching their heads at that one when they read the patch notes, and understandably so. So the reason why we did that was there was actually a limit on the amount of items that we could put in the Fabricator. So in order to fit all the weapons in for Operation 4, we had to take the pistols out. So in Operation 5, we've resolved that issue, so we will be able to put the pistols back in. And you should be able to purchase the Snub, Talon, and Bolt Hawk.
Have you looked into seeing if Stim can get a damage reduction? As soon as you get it on hard difficulties, practically one claw shot removes it completely.
Right. Yeah, like that's a tough one because Stim is essentially the same as health, right? It's just an extra layer that's on top. There are some classes that have cards that can increase the cap of your Stim capacity, which helps with that problem, but it's definitely something that's on our radar. I know the big one is kind of, there's like a thread on it on the forums around sort of Paddock and his Stim bleed, and it's very difficult to kind of keep that going. Personally, like I would prefer to actually just buff the card and challenge the players to find unique ways to keep the Stim up, but it is definitely a valid concern that the Stim is pretty fragile, especially against certain enemies like elite drones and stuff like that. But maybe try Mac. You can get a Mac shield in there, maybe try Cog Gear, maybe try Marcus with a Band of Brothers. But there's ways to definitely to make it work. The question is it worth the effort? Like that's a really good question. Like maybe it's not. Maybe it is. I don't know. We can definitely look at if the tuning for that is in the right place. But it's a great question.
I know it's been asked before, but why not put Locust skins over the top of Swarm characters in the game and keep the Swarm characters in Horde? Boom, done. Now you have Locust and Swarm in TVs. Do you want to talk about why it's not as easy as boom, done to do something like that?
Well, yeah, like when you kind of put it like boom, done, like, if we did do it like that and we literally just like swapped the skin and said boom, done and shipped it, like people would probably not be perfectly satisfied with the result because it would just be the same as the Storm drone. Like if we did that, we would definitely want to do like some tuning to make sure that it acted roughly the same as it did in the older games and stuff like that. Or at the minimum, just give it sort of a different, something about it that's a different challenge to the player than the mirror that it has on the Swarm. So sort of like the boom done, like we could do that just to kind of say that we have Locust and Horde or whatever, but we definitely want to make sure that if we're adding something to the game, we're adding value to the game, right? So we don't just want to put a skin on something that we already have and just say that we've added something new because we sort of haven't, if that makes sense. So we want to make, even if it's just something as simple as like they're tougher, like we just want to make sure there's something unique about them that adds something new to the game.
How does TC feel about using the Fabricator to block off lanes?
That's a great question. So this sort of ties in for me a little bit with, there's been sort of some concerns around the viability of the engineer. And for me, this one sort of makes that problem worse, right? So you have certain maps that are very close quarters, maps that sort of have narrow choke points, like Forge, like Exhibit, like District. Those are fun Horde experiences. Like it's fun to have maps where like the enemy is sort of like funneled down a choke point, but the Fabricator sort of acts as an invulnerable barrier, which does make it a little easier for the engineer, right? Because they don't really have to worry so much about keeping barriers repaired on it, or different ways to keep enemies out, right? So we are playing with some things internally to see if we could change that in a way that feels fair. What we're kind of playing around with right now in our playtests is a version where the Fabricator can die, and then when it dies, you just revive it.
That's a fun idea.
Like 4,000 power. So that you're just not so there is a cost to using it. Like you could still do that if you wanted to. You could still put the Fabricator in the door, but there would be a cost now. So it would eventually die. You would have to repair it. It could be expensive to maintain. So we're sort of exploring what we can do there. The goal of that would be so that the engineer is more valuable on maps that have choke points like that.
Could Dell get better cards for Escape? I know the engineers in Escape kind of are. That's a challenge,
I can take
right?
That. So like we knew that when we put Dell in Escape in Operation 4, like we knew he wasn't in the best place for Escape. We didn't want to just sort of hold him back just because he wasn't effective in Escape. So we put him in Operation 5. He's going to get a bit of love. So we're playing with some cards internally. Like he won't be an absolute monster in Escape. We're not looking to make him meta, but we are looking to give him some cards that at least he'll be able to hold his own, and you won't really feel like you're putting yourself at a huge disadvantage if you bring him into Escape. And they're pretty cool cards too. Like I think it'll bring like some unique gameplay to Dell that has been sort of lacking on his class at the moment.
Have you considered a return to the 3 down mechanic from Gears 4?
Oh, so is that sort of like when you go down 3 times, you just die?
Yeah.
That's a really interesting question. I haven't really thought about it, but it's really interesting to think about because that is one of the reasons why Jack is so effective as a medic. Because the players don't have to really worry about how many times they go down, because Jack can just hold the beam and revive you repeatedly. So if we did bring that back, it would add a bit of sophistication to sort of the support play, where it would be sort of the player would also be responsible for making sure that they're not going down repeatedly, as well as Jack or perhaps Coggear, trying to keep everybody up. So that's really interesting. Like I like sort of the thought of exploring that, but I won't sort of like say that we're definitely going that direction, but I think it's really cool to think about. So yeah, I've heard some misconceptions like, oh, am I going to be able to like mix and match? Like, am I going to take like an ultimate from one class and be able to combine with skill cards with another? So the answer there is no. So the class is the class as it is today. The change is that you can now use any cog character with that class. So it's not that you're using a different class or mix and matching. It's the same class.
Yeah. And then how are we going to handle voice lines? Because I know that like the invisibility one for Kate or the like the cloak one. Like what are we going to like? Obviously, are we? I don't. As far as I know, I don't think we went and recorded a bunch of voice lines for every actor to go and to do that. So how are we going to handle that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So the answer there is the narrative team has done a lot of awesome work to sort of bring in some more, I would say, like generic lines for certain groups of ultimates. So we kind of like bucketed the ultimates in types, like they're sort of like aggressive, support, stuff like that. And then we sort of gave more generic lines that would roughly fit with those ultimates when they're played with different characters. So the result is that you're not going to get the super personalized lines, like for example when like Lonnie says shock and awe when she uses her ultimate, but the lines will feel appropriate. So it's not going to feel out of place when you use a character and you use a different ultimate. It'll the production value will be there.
Boom shields. Embry has asked this question about 100 times in the chat. So how come we don't have the boom shields? It's the old. There is no other mobile cover in the series.
Yeah, like I would love the boom shield. Like I have lots of fond memories using the boom shield in Gears 2 and 3. It's a lot of work to bring a new weapon into the game. It's not an easy endeavor to do. Even stuff that is from older games, like there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get it to work in the new engine and to like make sure that the production value is there and that all the animations look correct. So that's not to say that we won't, that we're not adding, new weapons necessarily in the future, but it's definitely an endeavor to add a new weapon into the game. It's not, as simple as, like the previous question, boom, and it's done. It's definitely not simple.
Yeah. What are the top 5 things you're looking to improve the PvE experience?
Top 5.
That might be too much. I feel like the big one is the one that is coming.
Like I can speak very generally, because like a lot of them, we were working on an Op 4, right? So for me in Op 4, it was sort of the big goal was sort of like the fun factor and sort of removing the toxicity from the game. For me, when you don't have a balanced roster, that adds a lot of toxicity, because then you have players that sort of, they come in and they want to play a character that maybe they aren't meta, or they want to play the character a certain way, and then people sort of have disagreements about how to play. And the best way to avoid that sort of thing is just to have a balanced game, right? So that's on me. Like I have to make sure this game is balanced. I have to make sure the classes are balanced, and that people have a large and wide variety of play styles that are viable and that are respected by players in the game, right? So for me, that was the large goal of Operation 4. Wasn't perfect. Like there's still some work to be done, but I feel like we got we definitely got a hell of a lot closer than we did in Operation 3. So overall, I'm pretty happy with it. For the future, it's sort of what we touched on, earlier in the stream about sort of rewarding players for engaging in fun content, and sort of, not sort of forcing players that want to min-max into a situation where they need to play the same thing over and over again. At least if they don't want to, like if they want to sort of, play the game one way, it's totally cool. But I'm really interested in trying to see if we can start rewarding players and accelerating their progression for playing different things.
Is there a way to combine Escape and Horde by putting a safe room every 10 waves and having a new environment? Oh, like loading a new environment.
Oh, like that's a really cool idea. I like that quite a bit. Like, because that's sort of why we did Horde Frenzy, right? Because one of the things about like, people love 50 Wave Horde, and 50 Wave Horde is the classic Horde experience, but it can get a little dry sometimes. You're playing on the same map for 3 hours. What's really cool about Frenzy is you can kind of like play like a short 20-30 minute experience and pop into a different map and have another full experience, and you're not sort of playing an incomplete experience. That's a really cool idea. Like there'd be a lot of technical challenges around dynamically loading into a new map while you're playing, but it's a really neat idea.
I feel like this is the other obligatory question about Jack and Escape.
Oh, Jack and Escape.
Do you want to talk about why that would be a bad idea?
So we seriously considered and thought about Jack and Escape. We ran into a few problems. First of all, we would need to do sort of a lot of custom content to make the moments sort of work. Like because Jack isn't going to come popping out of a pod. That's not really going to work. When the revive mechanic in Escape is that the human characters get potted, right? So that would also need to be looked at, and how to do sort of a Jack version of that. But where it sort of really falls apart is how the potential for Jack to sort of just completely break the mode, right? So Jack can float around the map in cloak. He can wake up all the fights. The way Escape sort of works is enemies spawn in as you move through the hive. So in theory, Jack could just spawn everything and kind of break the fights. But then also the sort of tight team-based nature of and intimate nature of the fights, the Jack's revive mechanic would make a lot of those encounters pretty trivial, especially with the cloak ability. Mm-hmm. So there would be a lot of balancing work to do to make Jack sort of work in that environment in a way that sort of makes the game still compelling. Not to say that it's impossible, but it's definitely not, a super high priority for us to look at the moment.
Okay. Community maps. I know that the map maker is something that we deprioritized a little bit as a way for us to increase the production of maps of traditional maps that can be used in PvE and PvP. In terms of the ones that people are making, have you ever thought about going back and adding some of those to the game? Like, do you play a lot of those community maps? Have you wanted to add any?
Early on, I played a whole bunch of them, and there were some really, really unique ones that were pretty different. Definitely stuff that we wouldn't make. Like I played one that was sort of like the same hallway tile, like duplicated 100 times, and then you played like against 100 snipers, which was definitely not something that we would do, but in the moment it was actually pretty neat. But custom content is really powerful for games. It would be really, really awesome to get some of those hives in the game in some official capacity, but like you said, we have deprioritized mapmaker in sort of to free ourselves up to focus on sort of areas of the game where we feel we can get more value and to the players faster. So that's not to say that we can't go back and maybe look at ways to leverage custom content in the future, but it's definitely not something that we're looking at in the short term.
Okay. In Horde, have you ever thought of adding a third tab in the Fabricator that allows you to spend money on reinforcements? Kind of how in campaign
would allow you
like to use
adding
DBs or
gears
sentinels.
And stuff like that?
Yeah.
So I really love that kind of thing. I really do like seeing sort of like the AI gears running around fighting and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it's a performance challenge. There can only be so many, I guess internally we call them pawns, but I guess sort of like enemies and allies. There's only a certain amount that can be on the map at a given time, right? So we wouldn't really be able to infinitely add, I guess saying infinitely is not correct, but the more that we would add on the friendly side, it would actually take away from the amount of enemies that could spawn. So there would be some work some performance challenges to overcome in order to spawn to do that without having to impact the amount of enemies that can sort of be spawning at the same time. But you know, I love the idea, like the idea of sort of bringing in, you know, allied reinforcements that are AI. I think is awesome, and like you can see that we kind of tapped into that a little bit with some of the classes, like you know, like Dell spawning in the trackers and Baird spawning in the DR1, but I'm sure you've also noticed that the numbers are quite small. So, you know, Dell's only spawning in 2 and Baird's only spawning in 1. And that's very purposeful for performance reasons, right? So there would definitely be some challenges there to overcome.
Why can't Jack get points for smelting in Horde so he can get more points in XP? I'm assuming it's in the Forge,
right?
Yeah, right?
So that's actually kind of interesting. So it is a little tough being a Jack these days. Like, you know, you're sort of... to be an effective Jack, you're sort of expected to do, you know, these tasks that, you know, either don't give you score or you know, could, you know, be a little monotonous. Now, we could look at, you know, giving score for that sort of thing, but one of the things that I'm looking at in the future for Jack is giving Jack some potential for more active sort of engaging loops when it comes to sort of what he's doing during a wave. So look forward to some changes there.
Can you take portions of campaign mode to create new maps with perhaps just a few tweaks? Like, and this is more you putting your level designer hat on. I think, did you give me the answer for this? There is a reason.
Yeah,
it's a
I think
performance
I did.
issue.
So
yeah.
It's not quite as simple as sort of, you know, cordoning off a part of campaign and just sort of, you know, turning it into a map. There's a lot of differences between sort of how a campaign level is created versus a multiplayer level. The main one is that they're sort of optimized differently. So there is like a different visual bar between a campaign environment and a multiplayer environment in terms of sort of, you know, the performance, right? So obviously a multiplayer map needs to be built in a way that can support not only, you know, 10 players in a 5v5 versus scenario, but then also in Horde when you have all these enemies running around and, you know, players are using ultimates and there's all this crazy stuff going on. So the way that the art needs to be built is just fundamentally different, right? So there is work, not to say that you couldn't do it, but there is work to do to make that happen. There is also the question of, you know, is the layout appropriate for what you're looking at? Like, you know, campaign arenas are built to be sort of a, you know, a one-time PvE encounter. So, you know, maybe they would be appropriate for a Horde situation. But you do, when you add a map, when you invest in a map, you want to make sure that you're getting value out of that, right? So to make sort of a 5v5 style map that can only be played in Horde mode, you know, is you know, you're definitely losing some value there because you're not going to be able to play that in 5v5 versus, right? So it's not to say that you couldn't do it, but there's definitely challenges. It's definitely not a situation where you can just copy paste the map.
How you change characters in arcade, can this apply to Horde as well? Sometimes you're locked into classes when people leave, but being able to change into something more viable without leaving would be useful. Have you thought about that?
Was the question changing
Basically,
your class mid-game?
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting. You definitely want there to be consequence to the choices that you make as a player. You know, you don't really want a situation where you're just a shapeshifter, where you're kind of moving through a hive, just kind of changing, you know, based on the fight. Like, part of the difficulty of Escape and Horde is you're going in with a team and you're going in with a composition, and you need to sort of work with that to overcome the challenges, right? So although, you know, I think it's a really cool idea, it could, you know, really lessen the tension and take out some of the difficulty of sort of working with a team in PvE.
Yeah. Well, and it's meant to be like that's part of the meta, right? Like I know that like for these escape hives, it's figuring out what is the composition, what is the way you want to play it, when do you want to use your abilities, when do you like that's part of like
well, that's one of
like,
the
that's
cooler
the puzzle,
things
right?
about
Like that's
Escape, right? Like all of the hives play a little different, and some hives are better suited to melee type characters, some hives are better suited to say like a sniper character, and looking at the hive and sort of figuring out which composition works best is part of the fun, right? That's actually part of the gameplay of Escape, right? So,
do you guys keep data on usage rate for each character and balance the top picks are on the lowest pitch classes? This is a game design question. So I think this is actually I really like this question. So how do you look at that when you're rejigging and buffing and nerfing? Do you look at it and go like, wow, nobody plays Grace. What do I need to do to make Grace more fun and viable? Because clearly people don't like her. Or, everybody's playing JD. What do I need to do to make it so maybe that people need to move out of the JD world?
Yeah, so absolutely we do use data and analytics to sort of, inform decisions that we make, especially game design decisions. Yeah, like we do have access to usage rates of classes, and we do look at that periodically to see sort of what the trends are, because you're not going to get the whole picture just by sort of, surfing the forums for a few minutes. Like you're definitely going to need to, combine anecdotal feedback, what you're seeing in the game as a player, and then also the raw data, and we do definitely have the ability to access that information.
Have you considered bringing back a classic Horde variant, like Horde 1.0?
Yeah, so I think it'd be really cool to have sort of a classic, like even if it was just sort of a special event, like to challenge players to, play the same difficulties they're accustomed to, maybe without skill cards or access to different, mechanics that are specific to Gears 5 Horde. So it's definitely something that I think is a really cool idea. And it could be a little nostalgic too. And what could be really cool about that is just seeing how you need to play a map differently, based on not having access to certain things that you're used to having access to, right? So different play styles that were enabled by skill cards, or different fortifications that you use to play certain maps. So I think it's really cool, and it's definitely something that we're looking at potentially doing in the future.
Will you add fun mutators? Like what would you consider a fun mutator, Michael?
So you can kind of see examples of that in like Gears 3, for example. Like they had like the Meteor, which actually Meteor was sort of the inspiration for Cole. I'm sure Gears 3 players see some similarities between Meteor and the way Cole's Ultimate works. But yeah, like we're definitely interested in doing fun mutators. Stuff that I'm interested in is mutators that potentially bring a bonus to certain styles of gameplay, because when you really think about it, like a positive mutator in a way could be a challenging mutator, because if you all of a sudden introduce, say, triple melee damage, like now you're challenging players to sort of make a decision, like do I play the game the way that I'm used to playing it, or do we play like a way that I'm maybe not used to, but they're offering triple melee damage, so I may as well, right? So it gives an interesting decision to make. And then and there's the question of like just crazy like for fun stuff, like enemies exploding in confetti, or like big head mode and stuff like that, like sort of like those classic ones that you see. That those did exist in Gears 3 and then in other games as well. But it's definitely something that we're looking into. Because there's a lot of opportunity to mix up the gameplay with mutators. I'm sure Escape players know that pretty well, that some of the mutators in the hives really change up the way that you have to play and the compositions that you have to use. So there's an opportunity there, especially for Horde, to leverage some of that. So we're definitely going to be looking at that in the future.
I just want to add that I love the fact that someone else is asking about fun mutators. I really miss those from Gears 3. I know there's not much they can do with Gears 5 for this, but it sounds like maybe they have some tricks up their sleeves to at least give us a little taste of what we've been looking for.
Why did you make the Matriarch so hard?
I didn't make the Matriarch so hard.
Or how about I find her the hardest boss in all of these
Excuse
PvE
me,
battles.
it's a she.
Oh, sorry.
Is a she.
She. Sorry. I apologize. Why'd you make her so hard?
Yeah, she's really tough. You know, obviously we did previously make a tweak to the health. She's still really tough. You know, there are strategies to deal with her though. Like, you know, there's certain characters that are very strong, and obviously the ice cannon is a really good option, which I'm kind of trying to do right now. But she's just sort of chilling near the Fabricator. But yeah, like boss tuning is something that we think about. But to be honest, I'd rather sort of bring sort of the weaker ones up instead of bring the stronger ones down, because you know, some of them are a bit of a snooze fest. So I really like how engaging the matriarch is. It takes a lot of teamwork to take her down, and but you know, looking at sort of the difficulty of the bosses and sort of, you know, comparing them to each other is something that we're definitely doing.
Yeah. Ooh. Have you considered more PvE difficulty, the sets of timings, puzzles, general dodging? Less, this enemy does just more damage. Like,
yeah, that's always sort of the struggle, right? Like being able to find difficulty that isn't just sort of, you know, adding more health, adding more damage. We found that in general, like there were a lot of mutators that were successful at. Oh, I already have some cog tags. They were successful at sort of doing that, but there's definitely more that we want to do. I think there's opportunities for different enemies to be more effective at different things than they are now. Yeah, so looking for ways to make the game more engaging with difficulty is definitely something that we're looking at.
what about join in progress? Have you guys thought about that?
Oh, do you mean sort of? Is that the question around converting a match-made lobby into a join in progress?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've looked at that. There's some technical challenges around sort of the online services part that would need to be solved, but that is something that I would personally love to have in the game. It can be a bit of a bummer when you matchmake and people sort of drop out, and then you know you get in this situation where you're like, oh, am I really going to be able to sort of complete this session?
Yeah, especially like, or you know, like I love Horde, and I actually really like the end of Horde. I'm happy to join at wave 40. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I like kind of something like that.
Well, I mean, like you can do that. That's actually sort of one of the ways that I like to play is before Horde Frenzy was in the game, I actually would sort of pop into games that were on like wave 40 and just sort of help them wrap up if they were down a man. But I think that question is more about sort of the limitation of matchmaking and
Yeah, not for the custom side, but yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. After releasing the turret in the Abyss, has there been any talk of maybe bringing the turret back as a fortification? The tri-shot is already stronger as it is.
yeah, like we've thought about it. Like the turret's tough, right? Because one of the problems in, well, I mean, depending on who you ask, it might not have been a problem, but one of the things that we saw in Gears 4 Horde was, you know, you would see a team where like everyone was on a turret and they were all just sort of like hold up and spawn, and you know, that's sort of the game, right? Like everyone's on the turret and they're shooting for all 50 waves, and you know, we weren't a huge fan of that sort of gameplay. So I think if we brought the turret back, it would probably be in the form of an ultimate or something that you could use sort of temporarily to get like a burst of high damage. Because the problem with the turret is if it's sort of where the damage lands, right? So if it's stronger than a tri-shot, then everyone's going to use it all the time. But if it's weaker than a tri-shot, then you know people are just going to use tri-shot, right? So it's a bit tough to balance it in a way where there's reasons to use it and reasons not to use it. So we would have to sort of look at sort of where the meta falls for that. But we do recognize that there's a hunger for the turret to come back into the game. So that's partially why we snuck it into Abyss to kind of, you know, test the waters on that. But yeah, like it's something that we're definitely thinking about.
Any chance of certain bosses may be weaker to certain types of damage, such as Gears Pop? Like kind of where like a little of that chess match where you've got like, you know, like skew yourself to this. I mean, I guess like the matriarch with the ice cannon, it's not like she's weaker, but it's a valid strategy on how to do it. Do you see it doing something like, oh, the Swarmac is more resistant, is more susceptible to explosive damage versus?
Yeah, like I think that's a wonderful idea because it sort of helps with the gameplay of sort of all these tools that you have at your disposal and all these different classes, and then sort of the game knowledge to know like when is the right time to use different things. The one challenge there is just the feedback. Like you do want to make sure that the players have a good way to sort of figure out that that's happening, that those effects are happening, and that's sort of the challenge is like the player feedback part of that, where you would want players to know like, hey, like this damage that you're dealing is more effective because for whatever reason, right? So that would be sort of my concern there, to make sure that the messaging is good and that the player feedback is good, but I think it's a wonderful idea.
Do you ever consider one big horde specific map, like a tall tower that you are in and below are waves of hordes coming towards you, boarding up windows, kind of like sort of COD Zombies as a bad example, is what he says.
Yeah.
So
sure, like the horde on tile stuff on the tile maps is sort of like us sort of dipping our toes into that sort of thing. We can definitely take it further. The one thing I will say is that when it comes to versus map design, we have skewed a little far towards, versus when it comes to the maps, and we haven't necessarily made maps that are more tailored to horde gameplay. Is it okay if I kind of like tease a little bit of something? Like,
I don't know what you're teasing.
Okay, it's there's a new map that's tailored to horde. I'll say that.
There you go. That's fine.
Maybe not to the point where like,
it's not like a dedicated
you're like
map.
boarding up windows and stuff, but we're definitely looking at ways to, satisfy sort of the PvE audience when it comes to the 5v5.
Has it been announced about the tuning going live on Ranked? I guess I'll just address a few sort of non-PvE questions. We're hearing you guys are loving the tuning. This is the developer playlist tuning. There are a few more things that we're looking at. There's a bug specifically around the Nasher and the jib distance that they're looking at, that they want to kind of play with. And once they solve that bug, once we solve that bug, then that's going to allow us to do a few more tuning refinements. And then once we get it to a place that we feel really good, then we'll look at what's next. Could you possibly make the AI fight in Horde like the DB would shoot the Swarm if they hit each other, similar to the Locust and the Lambent?
Yeah, no, I was actually a huge fan of the fact that the Lambent and the Locust fought each other in Horde in Gears 3. It's something that is interesting to think about. It is important to consider that it would slightly lower the difficulty of the game if sort of the different enemies were getting sort of distracted by each other. But, I'm conflicted on it because, I love that kind of thing in Gears 3. It was cool to kind of see like the mythos of sort of like the different enemies kind of playing out on the battlefield. But, it definitely would have an impact on the difficulty. So.
Oh, and then Neon says, it appears there's a decent amount of tile-based assets at disposal for you all. Since we are seeing tile-based maps, why not allow the players to develop their own? It would say, that's what, do you want to talk about why it's like some of the...
It's a little more complicated than that,
Yeah.
Because in order to make these maps work, like it wasn't like we just opened the map editor and sort of just... like there was a lot of bug fixing. Like when we introduced Horde into this environment, like with these tiles, like there were bugs that came up. Obviously, some of those made it into the game. There was some issues around like the Sentinel and the Guardian getting stuck in the walls. So being able to sort of have the total freedom to make a Horde map out of all the tiles, like could be problematic. So we needed to make sure that we were curating it and making the content on our side to make sure that we weren't releasing content in the game that had a lot of bugs. So.
What about bringing the movement from PvP to PvE?
Yeah, that's something that I'm pretty passionate about. I was pretty disappointed that we couldn't get the one-to-one movement tuning in. It's something that I think we're going to look at doing eventually. It's just that, like previously stated, there's a lot of potential for bugs, and there's testing that needs to be done. So it's something that we do want to do in the future, but it's not as simple as sort of just turning it on. If that makes sense.
What about, like, I think Chote talked about this. Are we getting an AI update so the enemies are smarter and harder? To kill, the most advanced thing I've seen is a Swarm Grenadier roll. What about adding some different, like, more gears oriented movement?
Yeah, like one of the things that I'm really interested in is seeing if we could get like an enemy in the game that uses the PvP AI, like the one that can actually like pick up weapons and stuff like that. I think that'd be really neat. Like seeing a drone that could pick up a boom shot from a scion that you've killed and maybe use it against you.
Is there a reason why that's not there currently?
It's more of a Jamie sort of question around like, the enemy creation, but I do think there's opportunities for sure around doing some interesting enemy types.
And I will be on a stream with Tac-Com tomorrow to talk a little bit about community and talk a little bit about some of other questions I'll be on with. I think Razor's Edge, Chaps, and Neon, I believe, are the 3 folks that I'll be chatting with. So make sure to stop by their stream and give them some love and ask more questions.
And wow, that was a great transition. As Dana said, I'll be hosting a stream later with the Razor's Edge, Neon Velocity, and, well, Dana. And yes, it's later today at 1:15 Eastern Time. We'll have a ton to discuss about the Gears community and the community team. Be sure to tune in there and join the chat. But other than that, I think that does it for this week's recap. I told you this was going to be a long one. Like, I was expecting 30 minutes or so. I seriously did not expect this 1 hour craziness. Oh well, I guess that means there was a lot of good discussion. As usual, if you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll hopefully see you in a few hours for the live stream.